Hello my friends, I'm Kayla. This is my February wrap up. I read 20 books and I'm going to tell you about them. Here are my stats for the month if you're interested. I'm going to try to film each of these reviews in one take. So I would recommend just putting me on double speed so my pauses seem less like pauses because I don't want to have to edit this too much. With that said, let me bring some things into the screen like my stats and this comment, which I actually got a really long time ago, but it said to organize my wrap up by like most to least popular. So I randomly a year later decided to do that with these ones. So we're starting with a book that has like 100,000 reviews to one that has 100. First up with 114,000 ratings, this is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I gave it a 4.5. I thought it was this beautiful story written in the 1950s, set in France, where this man named David is getting involved with this guy named Gianni. They just met. He works at a bar and they spend a lot of the book in Giovanni's room where he lives. They kind of live together, but David is promised to another. And so his time spent with Giovanni, did I say Gianni? His time spent there is really isolating. They are just together and he's getting to kind of live out the life and the love that he wants, but also the time spent is very isolating and alone with his thoughts. And there's a lot of self-hatred. There's a lot of shame involved. There is this sense of dread as the reader because David is reflecting on his life and decisions, and you know that some tragic things have happened. So waiting to see what's going to happen just has this very intense feeling associated with it. I think it's about like the choices he has to make if he wants to live a life that other people want him to live and that he could see as peaceful and easy, or if he wants to go with more of his heart. Definitely understand why this has a lot of readers and is beloved. It is beautifully written. The writing itself is stunning. I started tabbing a library book. Not annotating, but tabbing. So I do need to remove those, maybe buy myself a copy, swap them over, and then give this back. Next up, a very different tone, Bunny by Mona Awad. This was a reread. It's one of my all-time favorite books. And it's funny because I did a video recently where I talked about all of my 5-star reads and what they have in common and really dissected it. And one of the things I said is I love books and about authors and about storytelling. And yet I didn't put this into that category. And upon reread, I was like, obviously, like this is so much about the storytelling process and creation itself. So we have Samantha who's in an MFA program. There's this group of women. They call each other bunnies. They're this little weird coven. She doesn't want to be involved with them. She judges them a lot, but there's something really alluring. There's a seduction involved. And once they bring you in, you feel so special and so needed. And while they didn't appreciate Samantha's like writing previously, and they gave her a lot of critiques when they were in the classroom, once she is now a part of the bunnies and involved in the weird kind of magic that they are involved in, they now go to class together and they're like, oh, Samantha, your writing is stunning. You're so perfect. You're so amazing. And she just gets wrapped up in it all. It gets so incredibly messy and confusing for her in this scenario and for us as the reader, and it's just so much fun. This one has 93,000 readers. The next on my list has 77,000, and that's Our Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng. So this one is a kind of dystopian near future story where if like materials are being removed or people are being removed from families and businesses and what have you, when they are deemed by the government not fitting into American culture. So it's a story about discrimination and racism, but also censorship. We have this woman who is a writer and a poet, but her writing is not really known to her child because it has been removed. She's left her family, and we're following her son Bird, but also her, and kind of reminiscing on, you know, her earlier life, her relationships, having Bird. And at one point after she's left the family, Bird starts getting notes and hints that his mother's alive. And somewhere where she wants him to come to her. I gave it a 4. I think the concepts were really well done and thoughtful and intentional. You got exactly what the story was trying to say, the harmful nature of you know, stripping away freedom, but also there's this sense of like taking things away from people and hiding things from people, you know, on a broad scope being bad, but also keeping things from your children under the guise of like protecting them. Also just like not sharing the truth with them can be harmful as well. I think my only like issue with this one compared to her other work is that it didn't feel as character focused or heart-wrenching or heartwarming. I just didn't feel like the characters were as strong as the setting itself, but they probably weren't meant to be. Next on my list with 54,000 ratings is Passing by Nella Larson. So this is about 2 women, and they are both Black in America, but have the ability, the option to pass as white. And they both do it kind of differently. Obviously there's a sense of safety that comes along with that, but one of them is married to a white man, one of them is with a Black man, and the white man doesn't know that his wife isn't white, so she has now put herself in dangerous circumstance, and she's kind of looking at her friend, maybe regretting her decision a little bit because she is living a more authentic life, and maybe that is more appealing in certain circumstances. I think they both have issues with each other. They come in and out of each other's lives a few times throughout this pretty short book. And there's just a lot of judgment, but also envy for each other. And they're a little destructive of each other. I gave it a 5. Next, I guess I can just look here, is The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead, which has 23,000 reviews. My one take for each book is not going well. I gave this a 4. It is a thriller where a woman she learns about the death of a friend through a podcast by another friend. So her and this friend get together and they decide to go back to where this like secret society is so she can find out what really happened to her friend. It's not really told via podcast. It kind of is because she gives interviews to this guy throughout the story, telling the truth about what happened to her back in college and the things that she was up to, and how involved with this kind of society cult she was. I think it perfectly depicted how alluring this kind of cult was for her, because it's told through her eyes at a younger age, when she was seduced into this world and saw it as really sexy, and this man brought her in, and it's a lot of talk of misogyny and control over women. It's about wealth and privilege and power. I gave it a 4 because I think it was a little bit, it got a little bit silly for its tone, with the way that they would integrate themselves into this group and then just like get out of things really easily. Everybody was just like letting them in on all of the secrets. It felt a little too easy, but it was also a really heavy read, so I don't think it was balanced perfectly, but I gave it a 4, so it was good. Then we've got How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix, and when I was organizing these, I didn't look up every individual one and then start sorting them. I kind of guessed the order and then went on to confirm, and this has so many more readers than I thought because it's such a newer release, but obviously this author is well known. So it has 18,000 ratings, and I think it'll work for a lot of people. I gave it like a 2.75 at the end of the day, just because it's not really my brand of horror. So in here you have a brother and sister who are returning to their family home to sell it. They've lost their parents and they're going through all of the stuff in it. They don't agree on what to do with the house. Their parents didn't even necessarily agree on all the inheritance stuff. So you find all that out at the beginning. Their mother was like a puppeteer, and so there are creepy dolls and puppets around the house. I can definitely see why this works for so many people. It feels like a horror movie, like a ridiculous, camp, silly, action-packed horror movie. And I think in this day and age with horror books, a lot of them are leaning more like exposition and thoughtful and a lot of commentary about society and really literary, especially the ones that I pick up, and a lot of traditionally published ones. So this one being more silly and just wild. fits with Grady Hendrix's writing style, but it really went there. And I've read so many reviews to see why people love this so much. And so like there is this balance of it being heartwarming, but also dealing with grief, but also horror and ridiculousness. And so like I can see it, but it was not for me. And I don't know how else to explain it besides just like the brand of humor and horror. It's not my type of horror movie and it's not my type of horror book. But a 2.75 is not bad, right? Like it's just under a 3, and a 3 I consider a fine read. So I think his writing is still solid. Like I still enjoy so many things, like the setup and the atmosphere. It just got to be too much. Next up, with 13,000 ratings, we have How Beautiful We Were by Mbolo Mbwe. And this is set in the fictional African village Kasawa. And it is about how their environment and population is being stolen by this American oil company. I gave it 5 stars. It is slow, super slow and harrowing. It is at the same time about like resilience and revolution and power. It's also about just greed and hate and destruction, and it's a really sad, slow read. It takes place over multiple decades and following different generations, coming to accept what's happening, and doing everything they can to fight against it. So there is this group of representatives from this company, and they come to the village frequently, and they hold these meetings and they share these surveys, and they act like they want everybody's input and like they're taking their critiques seriously as their water's being poisoned and children are dying. They're sharing these concerns, thinking that the company has their, best interest at heart, because that's the way that they are presenting themselves. But they slowly, each individual kind of realizes that that's not what's going on, and coming to terms with that, as they like live in different parts of the world and go through different things in life. It is so beautiful and so sad, and I would recommend it to like any literary reader because I think it's just really good and truthful. Then next up I have 4 romance books. I feel like romance is the hardest thing for me to do reviews for because I talked about all of these things in a vlog, and like finding other things to pinpoint, I don't know how. So with 12,000 ratings, we have Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail by Ashley Herring Blake and Love and Color by Bolu Babalola. With 11,000, there's Two Wrongs Make a Right by Chloe Leese. And with 8,000 is Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert. So in Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail, this is the sequel to Delilah Green Doesn't Care, and it follows her like uptight sister Astrid, who she believes she's straight in the first book. She's a side character, but a pretty prominent side character. In this one, she is, ending a relationship and exploring her sexuality. And we have Jordan, who is partially like owner. There's this inn that is in the family, and Astrid is like renovating it, and she is the carpenter, so she's going to be working on it. There's this reality TV show, and it's a hate to love dynamic, but I know I talk about how much I like fake dating, but I also equally like fake hating. So as they begin a relationship, they are on this show, and the dynamic between them that's very like, they just butt heads a lot. The producer of the show, or the host, sees that and wants them to kind of lean into it. So they become both the equal like focuses of this show, but they're getting involved behind the scenes. So it's just this really fun dynamic. I gave it a 4, or a 4.25. I quite liked it. Then we have Love and Color, which I gave a 4.5 because naturally in a short story collection, there's going to be ones that don't work as well. I didn't tab my favorites, but I can definitely remember them. I think I really liked Nefertiti. I liked Ocean or Ocean. There's also some original tales in here. So these are based on like mythology and folk tales, and her new tale, there's one in here, Tiara, that I loved so much. And if you haven't read anything from this author, I would recommend this first, because if you like some of the dynamics in here and the style of things, it's just so satisfying to go from this to Honey and Spice after, or it would be if I had done it that way, because you get to see all of these ideas like fully explored in that novel, which is really fun. My all-time favorite is Thisbe, which has Honey and Spice vibes the most, I think. They're like dorm mates, neighbors, and they bond a little bit, obviously fall in love. But it's based on mythology from around the world retold, and in some cases that means just like the character's name is used and thrown into a completely different environment. And sometimes it's like a true retelling of a story with the same dynamics. And there is a list of the tales at the back that inspired all of the stories. And so looking into them after or before is fun. Not that I can find where that would be. Hold on, here it is. Sources of inspiration. Is there anything else I want to say? No, I don't think so. I just loved it. I loved it a lot. Switching to what I didn't like, Two Wrongs Make a Right. I think it really comes down to me not liking these characters. In a romance, I really need to enjoy both of the people individually and their dynamic. And while I can recognize their dynamic is sweet, that's maybe not what I'm looking for. I like more wit, I like more banter, I like more like a butting of heads. And in this we have a very serious kind of uptight guy and a very quirky girl, and they get set up on a date and they end up fake dating, which is a favorite trope of mine. But unfortunately, like all of the fun things that usually come along with fake dating just weren't really present in here. It got really sentimental really fast and the fun was lost. I know people say that this was like a fun rom-com. I just didn't feel that. It was very soft, and I can appreciate their relationship and what it did for them in the book, but like I didn't like it. And the third act conflict is one of my least favorites ever. I really think it was stupid and I was mad about it. And I gave it a 2. Then we've got this one, which I'm giving a 5. It is a YA romance, which I really don't read much these days. Do I read any romance much these days? I guess. I'm getting into adult romance. It's happening. It's a mixed bag all the time. But this one involves Bradley and Celine, and they're both kind of competing for this scholarship, and they have to participate in an outdoor survival expedition. It's not just like one event that they go to, it's throughout their school year. We're following them for a while, which is good because, you know, seeing a relationship develop from friends to enemies to love, happening over such a short time period of just like what this looks like could have been like a weekend backpacking trip. I appreciated it so much because it was over a lengthy period of time where throughout the year they go on they participate in different events. There's like scavenger hunts and stuff that is being put on by this local, like well-known figure who works in law. And so she puts it on, people are gonna win. And it was just sweet. It was predictable, it was fun. The side characters were great, family dynamics were great. I just feel like this was really solid. I just remembered the other thing I wanted to say about Love and Color. I love that it's not just about the relationships. You know, it's not about like famous couples from history. It is, or mythology, but it's more so focused on women. Like it really is a women's story. It is about their love and relationships, but it focuses on them. Each one is titled after a woman, and it's about her growth, development, decisions, and I thought that was really beautiful. Okay, moving on to Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. This has 4,000 ratings. I ended up giving this a 3. I thought the setup was really interesting. It's about this woman who sells her soul for reasons, and she gets the opportunity to get it back. She's like this investigator, detective, and she needs to find this infamous new kind of serial killer. And it's set in, was it the 20s or the 40s? Now I don't remember, but it's like really magical, and I think ended up being more fantasy than I was expecting, or maybe not more fantasy than I was expecting, because I have read The Midnight Bargain from this author and I really, really enjoyed it. But I think because it was so much longer, there was time to get into other stuff than just the fantasy. And This one involving like angels and demons, it ended up being so focused on that, but maybe it wasn't so focused on that. It's just that it was short. Like this is only 120 pages and I love a novella, but it was so action-packed and busy that I never really got to enjoy the main character, the journey they were on, the relationship that's at the center of this. She wants to live her life with this woman, but you know, she has sold her soul. So she's desperate to get the life that she wants. I think that because this author is one of the only ones who's convinced me to love historical fiction, I wanted this to be such a win, and there was so much to enjoy, but I think it felt like the end of a novella series to me, like the 5th book, where in all the other ones she's just living as a detective, or maybe she sells her soul in the 1st book and she's not really focused on getting it back, but now in this book she's found her love after all of these other trials and tribulations she's gone through, and now like we get this epic action-packed ending. I could have enjoyed it if it was that, but I wasn't really convinced of anything because it was so short. So that's where I'm at with that. Then we've got Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones. This one, where is it on my list? I put it near the bottom because I thought it wouldn't have a lot of readers because it like just came out, but it already has, or I guess we're into the thousands at this point. This has 1,600 ratings. This was an ARC provided to me from the publisher because I love My Heart is a Chainsaw so much. It follows Jade and she just loves horror movies, and it's very internal monologue, the 1st book, where she is just visualizing things around her, creating this narrative. It's very interesting, reflecting on her past, coming to terms with things, but also there is destruction happening around her. And in this one, we come back to her, but if you didn't enjoy the slower pace of the 1st book, this one really ramps up. It has a more steady pace throughout. It is action-packed the entire time, and now there is a serial killer. But Jade is not necessarily the central focus. She is in it, but there are so many more POVs and narrators, and it's so fun. The audiobook I would highly recommend. It's fun because it dissects the horror genre, the horror movie genre yet again, but it's coming from other people as well, and almost convincing Jade that she needs to come back to the area and she needs to solve this string of murders, and it's like how it lures her back in. I thought it was really good. I gave it a 4. I gave the 1st book a 5. I can't wait to finish the trilogy, see what happens. Next up, we've got A Million to One by Adiba Jagadar. This one, where did I put it on my list? It has 1,000 ratings. I gave it a 3. It's about the heist on the Titanic. We have 4 main girls, and I gave it a 3 because I think the idea is really good. Coming from an author who's written like amazing sapphic love stories in like high school, I think this was ambitious, and I'd be interested to read more from her outside of what I've read from her before. But I think that the characters were distinct and interesting and different, but we didn't really get like the fun of the heist, like the choosing who's going to be involved, them getting to know each other because they're all kind of strangers. There is a relationship developing between 2 of the girls. There is this past kind of relationship that happened. There's antagonists and villains, and they have this goal to steal something from somebody who's wealthy, and they all have ambition for life after this journey. And obviously as the reader you have this sense of dread because you know it's the Titanic, you know it's going to sink, you're wondering who's going to get off the ship, are they going to get the life that they want afterwards. But my 3 is just because like the atmosphere was good, the writing was solid, but it is really just them running around for hundreds of pages. It had a little bit of an emotional impact, but I just don't think we got enough of the characters, like enough time to get to know them and build these relationships in a really convincing way to give it any higher than a 3. So that's where I'm at with that. Then we've got The Hollow Kind by Andy Davidson, which is another 3, which is a bit of a bummer because this is a highly anticipated horror for me. It's kind of a folk gothic horror, and we have a couple different timelines in the 80s and then one in like the 1920s where In the 80s, there's this woman and she is escaping her life with her young son. They're moving to this old house that her grandfather owned. And there's this like ancient evil following them. And so when we flash back to the other timelines, we're following different ancestors of hers, and they're like building a business on the property. They are also being followed by this ancient evil, or what they consider a curse. There's a lot of talk of like the illness that's going on, people quitting, fires happening in various buildings, and this curse they feel is following them. And the thing about a curse is, at some point you feel like you have like gotten used to what the curse means, or you feel like you can handle it, like you know what to expect, you feel like you're feeding it properly, and then something comes out of nowhere and destroys everything, or you can't pass down that knowledge to the family member in time. So in the 80s storyline, she doesn't know anything about this ancient evil, but there are journals and there are things that she gets to learn. And again, it was a really fun setup. At some point though, the pace just got completely off. It was like building and building and building for so many pages, and it was just so much action and so like epic fantasy feeling almost, and then dropped off really fast. I think this only has 700 ratings. I thought this was more popular than it was. I would be very specific with who I recommended this to. This isn't like a broad horror recommendation from me. The last romance on the list, Don't Go Baking My Heart by N.G. Peltier. This is the second book in the Sweet Hand series. I hope we get more in it because there are other characters I definitely want to follow. This only has 200 ratings. I gave it a 3.75. I feel like I can really trust this author. I just feel like the miscommunication, because it's always there, the third act conflict is always there, but it's handled in like a decent way that always makes sense. I feel like most of the characters are generally pretty logical and thoughtful, and that's why I definitely want to continue to read from her. So in this we have, okay, the reason it's a 3.75 is solely because of like this man and their dynamic. So again, it's not my perfect taste when the man is like really uptight and needs to like let loose, and the whole book is a woman who's like making him be more fun. Just because, you know, there's like hundreds of pages where this man is just like really annoying to get on board with. So in here, he is part of this like architecture firm, and there's like a baking competition at his work. He doesn't really participate in all of the outside of work hours fun activities, but he wants to be more a part of the environment, get more opportunities. So there's a baking competition, and he hires her to like teach him how to bake. So there's these fun baking scenes between them that are very cute. She is so wild and fun and over the top, and he takes a while to get on board with that, but they can't deny their chemistry. It's got that classic rom-com scenario or setup where one of the characters is like making a bet with their friends that they can accomplish something. So that makes it fun, but also high stakes, because like, when is the person gonna find out about the bet? How mad are they gonna get? And it was fun to follow. The baking was not enough, like the actual competition was not enough of the story. So that's that. Next up, again with around 200 ratings, we have Africa Risen, a new era of speculative fiction. I think there are 33 stories in here, all from authors I haven't read before except for Tananarive Due. I gave her story 4 stars. It's about a ghost ship. And I don't think I've ever actually read this before, but I can tell you what my takeaway is as the theme. The theme is just that they're speculative, but the theme that I most took away is, I would say 2/3 of these stories had to do with the resilience and ambition of especially younger people relating to the older generation. So I'm gonna have to pull up my list of ratings, because for the first half, I gave like everything 3 or 4. And then there was a point, I think exactly halfway, that almost everything ended up being 5 stars. So the first 5-star I gave, and the only 5-star in the first half, is called Mommy Waterworks by Russell Nichols. And this was about a girl who thought that she could figure out a way to create water. And the older generation was just not willing to listen to her, not willing to give her the opportunity. And eventually, you know, she gets to figure it all out. Even in an earlier one that I gave 3 stars, IRL by Stephen Barnes, this one had to do with virtual reality and the disconnect between different generations and like what people care about, what technology is important, and how technology can actually impact real life. Let's see what it actually says beyond that theme. Oh, it's just telling about the different stories in here. Created in the legacy of the seminal award-winning anthology series Dark Matter, Africa Risen celebrates the vibrancy, diversity, and reach of African and Afro diasporic science fiction and fantasy, and reaffirms that Africa is not rising, it's already here. So at one point, they all became 5 stars, and that was with Liquid Twilight. That was by Yatasha Womack, and it just was a story about the ocean. I'm trying to figure out how much I should be telling you about each one. Another favorite that I remember was A Girl Crawls in a Dark Corner by Alexis Brooks DeVita, which was about just like escaping entrapment and manipulation. And then the one right after was my absolute favorite in the entire one. It was called The Lady of the Yellow Painted Library by Toby Ogundurin. And this referenced Things Fall Apart, which is a book I just recently bought. And I thought that was really fun because the story involves like every reader's worst fear of getting a library book and then losing it and not being able to return it. But in here, in this world, you are punished for losing library books because that copy was actually the last copy or the only copy that existed, like in the entire world. So it's about kind of being chased by this librarian who wants the book back. I don't know what to rate this overall because I guess it has to be a 4 because there were so many good ones that had a really good impact, and then a lot of them were good. So there's that. Next up, let's do these 2 horror books because I want to pair them and recommend one and disrecommend one. So we've got A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher, which was an ARC kindly sent to me by the publisher. I gave these actually a pretty similar rating, but I think this one will work for a lot more people. I gave it a 2.5. They both have around 300 reviews right now. And this, much like Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey, I think you'd look at it and think, this is the type of like short, weird, house-focused horror that Kayla would like. But unfortunately, it just wasn't. It makes so much sense that I just saw Rachel Harrison is the one that blurbed it on the back because I feel like this is Rachel Harrison's brand of horror. It is fun and quirky, but also creepy. And it's just whether or not the like light, silly nature of a cozy horror works for me or not, and this one it just didn't. We have this woman who's going to her family home. Her grandma used to live there. Her mom now lives there, and her mom is doing things that like her grandmother used to like the way she's decorating the house, the way that she's acting in the house don't really feel to her daughter authentic. So she is an entomologist. She has a job in insects, and so like creepy insects have to do with the story. There's a creepy garden. There's a lot of interesting things in here, but I just feel like there were too many ideas present and that the story could have been cut down like 100 pages and it would have been spookier. And because I wasn't loving all of the side conversations or our main character, who I don't think was consistent. Sometimes she was quirky and silly and sometimes she was really serious. And I know people are obviously multifaceted, but I just didn't get a really good feel for her as a character or start to enjoy her narrative voice. I think this will work for people. I think the weirdness was fine. I just didn't really like the pace of it. I didn't get what I necessarily want out of a short horror book. I also didn't get what I want out of Redder Days by Sue Rainsford. Now, this was pulled out of my members TBR jar. However, I feel no pressure to like apologize, you know, for not liking someone's favorite that they recommended to me, because this one specifically was from a member who is interested in the book and wanted me to read it first. And I was happy to be the guinea pig and happy to now disrecommend it. Now, obviously every book does have an audience, so I'm not saying everyone will dislike this, but I'm pretty sure the average rating with only having 200 reviews is like around a 3, which is pretty low. And okay, so this story is really hard to identify, like what it actually is about, because it's very vague, and remains vague through to the end. So stories of this nature that have a very poetic writing style, I highlighted so much, like literally on every page for the first 50 pages, there's something highlighted because the language was beautiful and had me removed from the story. Like I didn't know what the narrative was. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what the point was. I didn't really get a good idea of the world we were living in, but the language was beautiful. So I was ready to just enjoy that and have it be a part of the atmosphere, and eventually, as books of this nature often do, lead to discovering what's actually going on. There's reveals, there's slow understanding you get to have. This was not that. This remained vague the entire time. So it's an apocalyptic kind of story where you're following these twins for the most part. There's a couple other POVs from people who are around the twins or know the twins, but it's mainly focused on them, and the death that's happening around them, sometimes that they have to commit or that they have witnessed, when people are red, when their red is showing. So it's this, it seems like it's this illness. You can see it on people. Their red is showing. It's like they have wounds. It's like they're injured, I guess. But also it feels like it's this metaphor for people's like sins or people's like inner sickness being revealed, like once you can see their red, and they can pass it on to you. So you just have to like kill anybody you see who is red. That's my takeaway. That's my interpretation. None of that's really in the pages. It's just people protecting themselves. It's just people isolating themselves, being scared. It's about fear and protecting each other. So that might not sound as like strange and vague as it is, but it really is. And then the book just kind of ends. And I thought that I would really struggle with explaining this book. Like once I got to, I think it was a quarter of the way in, I was like, I don't know that I'm going to be able to describe this book. So I decided to tell it in a series of pictures. So here is, I could tell that my face was doing something as I was reading, because I was getting this feeling that these twins were going to become involved with each other. So as soon as I got that inkling, I took a picture and I was like, my face is doing something strange. And so here's my face when the twins actually started to become involved with each other on page. And here's my face when I finished the book and I got absolutely no takeaways from what the fuck the book was even trying to do. Here are some examples of what I highlighted. This is how we grew up, living inside a mistake until someone told you otherwise, and then living inside the shadow the mistake had made. And like, that's so intriguing. Anna and I are twins because of red, because all burdens are less between a pair. So it's like, okay, I could sit here and I could dissect what that means. Like, okay, but it's never gonna tell me. It's a place to lie down if we ever feel a red coming. A place you can stuff your mouth with strips of salted linen. It's not so much a rule as a promise between us. If one of us goes in there, the other won't ask why. It's like pretty. And I thought it would also be important for me to remember all of the references to the red. And then I guess I stopped highlighting because I was like, you're never gonna tell me what's actually going on, are you? I could probably pretend to tell you what this book is about and what it's saying, but I would probably be wrong. And it was uncomfortable and weird and didn't make a lot of sense and didn't go anywhere that was interesting. If you read Follow Me to Ground by this author like I did and loved the writing and the weirdness of it all, this is as if you're just reading the first half of Follow Me to Ground and then it ends. The last one is Black Ghost of Empire. This has 100 reviews. I gave it a 4.5. It's from the historian and professor, Chris Manjapra. This is an educational text of the history of slavery and emancipation. It involves different timelines, and it's talking about oppression and human rights and Black organizers and activists who are fighting for the end of slavery. I think this should have been 100 more pages and could have just included like a little bit more. I did give it a 4.5. I think it's really well told. I think it accomplished exactly what it set out to do. I think the number one thing that this taught me was the importance of Black-run churches beyond like their impact in the Underground Railroad. There was this whole section that I tabbed that talked about burial associations, churches built and Black women who ran these churches, so people were no longer thrown into unmemorialized common graves or sequestered in the untended segregated sections of white-owned churches. Their remains were not strewn and lost across the declining and disappearing homesteads of white farmers. Having their own vault to inter their dead represented a huge victory for free people in the age of gradual emancipation. The prospect of burial with dignity, with a ceremony officiated by a Black minister in a Black-owned church, was itself a form of redress from below. This was definitely intended as a piece of educational material, and though some in this vein I feel like are intended for different knowledge bases that you're already coming from, this one is a really good introduction. Kind of includes everything that you need to know regarding emancipation, from what the word actually means to how it actually happened across different places around the world. And I would definitely recommend it to pretty much anybody who doesn't already have an understanding of the things that are talked about in it. That is the 20 things that I read in the month of February. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these yourself or if you're going to pick any up. As always, I love hearing your thoughts and opinions in the comments. I appreciate you for being here and watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.